Hi, it's Miu and I'm finally back with a new custom doll. I didn't plan to take so long for my second video, but a new opportunity for a project had suddenly arisen and it was more work than I had anticipated. If you are into crafting, chances are you know the legendary Bill making stuff, and if you know him, you have probably heard of his new tabletop miniature game that he came out with, which is called Bangarang in the Gutterlands. In this game you can create your own robot with a junkbot generator that lets you roll the attributes with a d20. There was also a big bot bash where lots of crafting YouTubers built their own versions of it, and I thought, wait, what if I used the junkbot generator but for a doll? So here we are. This video is going to be me making a little Gutterlands cyborg girl. So first step is of course rolling the attributes. I have my generator sheet and my d20, and we're going to start with the body. I got an 18, which is all dressed up, so I guess she will stay a fashion doll. For the head, I rolled a 10, which gave me fishbowl, and immediately I knew I wanted something diver/underwater themed and that she would have some sort of helmet. I rolled a 5 for the arms, so they will be stubby, and for the hands I rolled a 19, which are old witch hands. I then also got a 12 for the legs, which is stumpy, so with the arms being stubby and the legs stumpy, I really needed to find a solution because I didn't want her to look like Bernd das Brot. And lastly is the overall flavor, for which I got the most build trait ever, which is rusty. Since I planned on heavily modifying the doll, I was looking for a base doll that was already fairly damaged. I chose this wobbly-legged Abby that had also lost both of her underarms. The legs are an easy fix, they can just be restrung with a new elastic, but I will take care of that later after I know which modifications I'm going to do on the leg. I want to give her another face though, and for a water-themed creature, which one would be better than lagunas? In accordance with the condition of the base doll we already have, I chose one with a severe case of the wonk. If you're familiar with doll customization, you know the drill. First I'm gonna cut her hair off, and then I'm going to put her in boiling water. I decided to prepare both heads because I didn't really want to get the hair all soaky and then have to let it dry. The boiling water helps me get the vinyl head soft so I can pull it from the neck peg. After that I scrape out the hair from the inside of the head. Next I remove their faces with acetone. Since I used an Abby body, I had to sand off her glitter layer. You cannot use acetone for this because it will just melt the plastic. It was also heavily discolored because of her age. With an X-Acto knife I got rid of her factory imperfections as good as possible. With the doll prepped, we can now start with the actual project. I wanted to do the helmet first, and in mine I had a helmet of a deep diver, and in true Bill making stuff fashion I wanted to build the majority of my doll with garbage. I couldn't find anything round in my household though, so I went to my local cheap store and just bought a bunch of round stuff. As you can see, some were a bit bigger, some were a bit smaller. I was debating on shrinking her head maybe, because my main worry was that the bulb would be too big so that it would just be very giant and just too heavy looking for her small shoulders. While I was still debating on it, my boyfriend got new headphones, and the packaging for them just looked exactly like a diver's helmet. How is that even possible? I mean, it even has rivets. It also fits perfectly on the lamp that I bought, so I can use just one half of it. And thus I didn't find a solution for the helmet problem, the solution literally found me. I did need to shrink her head for it though, so I used the I used the slow shrinking method, which is 90% acetone with 10% water, and then I leave it in there for 48 hours. If you want an in-depth tutorial of this, I will link a video by Dirili dolls down below, who is the queen of head shrinking. After taking the head out, I was worried that it didn't work because for some reason it didn't expand, which it should usually do. But after letting it dry, I saw that it shrunk to the perfect size. Now for making the helmet, I took the bulb part of the lamp, I pulled it out and then I cut it in half. I also had to cut around the helmet shape for the front. Since it was made from some sort of cardboard, I covered it in craft glue / Mod Podge to give it more stability. As I mentioned in my last video, I like everything to be functional and removable, so I really wanted the helmet to be removable too. To make the helmet able to open up, I needed to put a hinge on the top of the helmet, which I didn't really have, so I salvaged one from this packaging that I found. And then I bought some cheap miniature hinges because I figured it's probably very useful in the future. I probably could have also made the hinge myself, but I think that's just unnecessarily more complicated. I glued both parts of the helmet on the plastic hinge and the opening mechanism totally worked. To make everything fit perfectly, I had to now put her head back on her neck peg. And for this I had to widen the hole a bit because remember, it is now smaller than before. And as you can see, with a few adjustments, the helmet fits around her beautifully. I wanted the helmet to have 2 round windows on the sides, so I found these things. I don't remember what they're from, but they made perfect windows, so I marked where they should go and then I cut 2 holes. When I knew they would fit, I cut the inner part out so that I could make them real windows later. I then glued them in with super glue and adjusted the holes until I was happy with them. Now, the hinge made the helmet be able to open up, but I still needed a mechanism to keep it closed around her, and for that I wanted to install 2 magnets on the lower sides of the helmet. For this I drilled 2 little holes because I wanted to pin it, because otherwise it would just break off very quickly. So I had 2 little wires stick out, and around them I put some epoxy sculpt in which I could push the magnets later. I did one half first and let it dry with the magnets inside. When it was dry, I did the epoxy on the other side, and this way I could just push the helmet together and the placement would be perfect. After that side was dry too, I used some super glue to give it some extra support. For the eye shape I went with really big eyes, and I wanted them to look kind of curious and innocent, because in my head the idea began to form that maybe she was a research cyborg who was sent to the bottom of the sea to research like plants or other things, and at some point they lost signal with her, so she was forgotten for 100 years under the sea, and that's why she's all rusty. I also had to come up with something for the stubby and stumpy traits, and my idea was that I would give her prosthetics so that it describes the real body parts, because they would be short, so kind of stubby and stumpy. And then the prosthetics would be a different entity so that the trait still kind of exists. I wasn't really sure if that was a good interpretation of these words, but then I found this image, so I took that as validation. This meant that her legs had to come off. To make her more cyborgy and also to give her more rusty traits, I wanted to give her a metal jaw, which I sculpted on with epoxy. I only sculpted on the edge because I didn't want to bulk up the lower part of her face. After that, I also restrung her legs. I color matched her face with acrylics. I really don't like if the brush strokes are visible, so I thinned out the paint a lot and then I just let it dry and put another layer until it was opaque. For the hair I used this white and blue acrylic yarn. For a silky outcome, this yarn works best. It has only 3 strands and they're very thick and pretty loose. I really hate when yarn hair comes out frizzy when it's not actually supposed to be textured or anything, and I figured that the pulling out method made the hair much more silky than the brushing method. This means that I unravel the strands and then I straighten them and then I pull them apart. This way you can also make sure that you get the longest fibers possible. If you're interested in this method, I will link the video I watched below, which is by Dorian the elf. Now, my preferred hair method is rerooting, but with the inside eyes going on and the shrunken head and everything, it was kind of hard to do. I decided to make wefts for most of the hair, but also reroot the hairline so that at least the parts will be rerooted. I cut out a chunk of the head beforehand that I could use later to insert the eyes. I then started rerooting the part and the hairline, which was kind of hard because all the hair holes had been shrunken with the head, so I needed to widen them with a needle first. The hair on top should be white and the lowest layer of the hair should be blue, and then I also put some very subtle blue strands in the white parts. You can see that my needle is clearly suffering, and also I broke about 4 rerooting needles while doing it because you really cannot leave too much time between widening the hole and using the tool. After I started leaving the needle in until right before I pushed the plug in, it worked perfectly fine though. When rooting the part, I would make sure that I would always lay the strands crisscross for a nice part. I loved how it came out, so tidy, so smooth. When I was done, I secured the plugs with PVA glue. It's now time to paint the face. I masked her hair off and then I primed her jaw for painting later. Remember these from my last project? I kept them and now I can use them as screws for her jaw. To paint the rust, I mixed up various tones of orange and brown acrylics, and I also crushed up some orange and brown chalk pastels. I looked at a ton of reference pictures and just tried to make it look as close as possible. I blushed her face with a darker blue. With a similar blue, I also sketched in her eyebrows and her eyeliner. I also painted her waterline blue. From there I gradually went darker, and then I figured out that I actually like it if it's black. For the lips I decided on a slightly darker blue for a natural look. For the lower lashes I just used a brush and paint right away. Looking at it now, the eyebrows looked a bit too arched and too harsh for me because she was still supposed to have more of an innocent look, so I erased them and I wanted to make them a little more straight. Matching her cute look, I also decided to give her dark blue and white freckles, and then I drew in some highlights and I also gave her some eyelids. I then took some more time to refine the eyebrows until I was really satisfied with them. And after that I could finally free her hair from the sticky tape. Now normally gluing on the eyelashes would be something you would do at the end because you will probably mess it up along the way, But I really had no choice because I needed to put in the eyes first, and I couldn't glue the lashes after the eyes because I would mess up the eyes, and then I also needed to close the head up, so I really had no other choice than to do it now. I like to use only the front part, like the inner eye part of human eyelashes, because I think if you use a full human length on a doll, it just looks very unnatural and too long, and it really looks like you just put human lashes on a doll. I also don't like to cut them later because them getting thinner at the ends is just what really makes them look very pretty and very real. For some extra realism, I then painted the lip and the waterline with some gloss varnish, and then I could move on to the eyes. For the resin eye molds, I still had some left from previous projects. I was so indecisive when it came to the eyes. I first tried some holographic yellow inside it so that it would like some sort of spotlight, and then I thought maybe a metallic black, and then I also couldn't really decide on the size of the iris. I tried a copper that would match with the rust color, but I didn't seem to like any of those. I tried black with a silver pupil, which should mimic like deep sea creatures, which I thought was pretty cool, but it made her look more monstery and not really cyborgy. And then I also tried blue, which of course is kind of fitting, but also I thought it was pretty boring because there was so much blue in the doll. And then I had an idea, which was to use no color at all, and I actually really liked this, and this was really what I was looking for the whole time. And yeah, I just ended up making the eyes white and not giving them any color. I did still give her a black pupil, and then I also made a black ring around the eye. Now I just needed to put some UV resin on top of it. I needed to cut the edges of the eyes a bit to make them fit inside the head. Using epoxy sculpt, I made a ring around the eye holes from the inside, and then I pushed the eye in. Since the head was so small now, it was really tough to get in there, and I should have made the hole a lot bigger. After a lot of struggle, I found the right placement, and then I just made sure I wouldn't move the doll so that it could dry like that, and after that you can put in some more epoxy to secure it. Last step is gluing the piece I cut out back on the head. Next, I make wefts out of the yarn hair, so you just put them on a plastic surface, and then you can use PVA glue because later you can just rip it off when it's dried. I cut off the excess dried glue, and then I can start gluing the wefts. I didn't want any glue parts to show through the hair, so I made a layer facing away from the hairline. It will later be folded over, like you would do when making the part of a wig. I had to press really hard against the hairline, and it was only possible to get the hair to stay there once the glue was a bit dried. I also used any thin and long tools I could find to get it as close as possible, otherwise there would be a visible gap later. Once I got that down, I continued gluing the wefts normally from the bottom. I made 2 layers with blue wefts before switching again to white. By the way, aren't they so nice and silky and long? The results of the pulling technique really amaze me every time. Done and thoroughly dried, I pushed down the hairline as good as possible and brushed everything smooth. The hair was a bit thick but nice looking nonetheless. Now the painful part is that I couldn't really keep the length. The hair would come out of the helmet when it's closed, which would maybe be cool if it was a motorcycle helmet, but for a diver's helmet not so much. Which brings me to the idea that a biker doll would actually be such a cool custom, don't you think? I have to put that on my list. Anyway, off with the hair to about shoulder length. Before going all in though, I wanted to also give her a fringe to support her cute look. I cut it so that she has short hair that covers her forehead, and then it gets longer and frames her face on the sides. The rest of the hair I wanted to put in pigtails that she could neatly pack away in her helmet. I tied them first and then continued cutting to the length they were supposed to have. All of this required a lot of thinning with a razor, which the hair ties don't like, as you see, so it was a continuous cutting, thinning, untying, thinning and retying. With her whole head pretty much done, I could continue making her helmet. With this all flat wire I was able to give some detail and hide the not so clean cut edges. I cleaned the edges around the side windows up with 2 tiny strips of craft foam. Now if you have watched Bill's videos or the videos from his second channel in which he for some reason calls himself Dan, you have probably seen those toys called junkbots. I must say I was amazed when I got them. You can build all sorts of things with these parts and even make them rotate or glow. Luckily, when I ordered 2, I got like the whole batch for sellers or something, which includes like 8 or 9 of these boxes. It is absolutely crazy, but at least now I have lots of spare parts to use without feeling bad. As you can see, 2 of them work perfectly for the side windows, but I needed to take care of the windows themselves first. So I cut out 2 round pieces of clear plastic. I glued them in and then I made a long sausage out of epoxy that I laid around the junkbot piece, and then I wedged everything together. Although the packaging I used for the helmet had rivets already, I wanted to reinforce the look with these tiny rhinestones. For the front, I used those slightly bigger and round ones. The back of the helmet is supposed to have a tube that connects it with the oxygen bottles that I will make later. The tube is made of an old skipping rope that I cut. I also cut a small opening for this in the back of the helmet. To make the connection to the helmet more interesting, I used this part that I found in a bag of miscellaneous IKEA parts. Whenever I glue parts together, I make sure to cut into the surface with an X-Acto knife so that it will have some grip. It fits perfectly into this other little tube that I cut from this thing that was inside of a deodorant. I cut this little piece of foam so the top wouldn't look so empty. I had to make a gap since the flat wire would block the hinge otherwise. This is a leftover of those stickers you put on doors so they don't make any noise when closing. The 2 holes I can later turn into lights. This front part of the helmet had to come off for a better fit. I don't know what this is, but I thought it would make a good detail. The same flat wire I used on the sides can now be the lower part of the helmet that sits on the shoulders. Any rough edges are cleaned up with epoxy again. Remember the body theme for her was all dressed up? I did think about what I could sew for her, looked at patterns and fabrics, but then I stumbled across this Frankie dress in my stock box and it was so perfect. The colors connect her blue tones with the reddish rust tones and with the white in her eyes and hair. It felt a bit like cheating, but I just couldn't have done this better. The only thing I wanted to change was getting rid of the bow tie. And with this easy solution, we can now move on to the legs. I'm using the flat wire again to wrap it around her leg stumps, so that it will look as if they sit in the prosthetics. For the thighs, I wanted the prosthetic to be a framework made out of rusty metal. For this, I first cut these two pieces of plastic that will determine the size and give it stability. On each side, there is one piece with a slight angle that I will use to give the outer thigh its shape. Besides a ton of glue, I also fill the gap with some epoxy to make sure it won't break off. This junkbot piece will make a perfect knee, as it can also be connected with a counterpart to form a joint. I just have to get rid of the stick thing. I drill holes into it and into the leg pieces to pin it with a piece of wire, otherwise it won't last very long. The cut off part on top of the knee joint also gets a little rivet. After that, I can fill up the hollow legs with air dry clay. Since it's only filler material, we can use something cheap, and also it won't make her legs too heavy. For the horizontal parts of the framework, I cut strips of craft foam and attach them to a piece of wire so that I can bend them in place. Once they fit perfectly around the two base pieces, I glue them on. Of course, we need to accessorize everything with rivets. For the seams at the back of the thigh, I make another detail by pushing a tiny jump ring for jewelry making into a piece of craft foam, gluing it on and cutting around it. Now before moving on to the lower legs, I wanted to clear the shoe situation. One thing I knew is that she would need giant and heavy boots with a metal frame. These shoes from my stock box were the best candidate for this. We know that our dolls have their feet molded for heels, so I would have to modify a high heel to a flat boot. Since there won't be any feet in them, I filled them up with hot glue. These two screw things from my bag of mixed IKEA parts will be the shins. I screw them into the dried glue like a regular screw. The cut-off pieces from the knees will now function as the joint. I again have no idea where these round plastic pieces come from, but I will use them as kneecaps. I needed some extra length, and for this I used these tubes from an old spray bottle. You can also see some pieces that I wanted to use as scarves. I will get rid of them later since I didn't like how they looked. I glued toothpicks into the holes of the screws with again super glue and baking powder, and then filled the tubes with glue to pin the toothpicks inside. The calf's eye sculpted by first roughly getting down the shape with tinfoil and then sculpting over it with epoxy. In the end they should look like two bulky wrapped around metal pieces. There was already some asymmetry in the legs from the different screws, which I really liked, so I wanted to support that with a sculpt. In the end, I needed to sand everything smooth. The sides of these ball things had to come off so that I would have a straight surface. With a strip of craft foam, I made the outer part of the sole. For the bottom part, I cut around the shape of the shoe. I decided I needed more coherence with the rest of the design and made another outer layer with a good old flat wire. I covered the cut-off parts with craft foam to make it even. The front of the shoes were sculpted with epoxy. It is supposed to look as if the normal fabric shoes are sitting in a metal frame. The look of the shoes I chose is already perfect, so I leave that part untouched. For a better connection of the shoe and the sculpted pieces, I place another strip of craft foam, which also looks like this kind of joints. or I don't know what you would call that part, but those things that gave the shoe or arm a movement. I push everything neatly into the sole with an X-Acto knife. Around the heel part I glue a small wire. And then of course more rivets. Since I kept the chains as a detail on the original shoes, I thought another chain would make a cool detail. It makes it look like the metal frame is strung to the shoes through them. The shoe was still missing some detail though, so I decided to fill the whole heel with rows of that small wire. Naturally, doll shoes have a gap at the back, which I hid with another strip of craft foam as well as the back seam of the sole. Then I also gave them some rivets. I gave the calves a seam and rivets so that they would look welded and screwed together. This was the last detail for the legs, so we can slowly but surely grasp the end of this project and move on to the arms. This junkbot piece would make a perfect arm prosthetic. It looks like a little screens and displays could be on there, and it looks kind of submarine-like. I did want to salvage her arm joint for it though, so I used a spare Abby arm for it. I had to use one anyway because I didn't find a good solution for the old witch hands that wouldn't throw off their whole design, when I realized that with the glitter, the size and the shape of her nails, Abby's hands would already be perfect for this. I didn't quite know how to attach the hand and still keep its full movement, but then I just heated the junkbot piece up and wedged the hand into it, and it just worked. How lucky! For the other arm I used another junkbot piece. I can also use its joint mechanism again. This piece is supposed to go directly onto her arm, so I widen the hole a bit and glue it on. I fill in the gap with epoxy. The counterpiece is a harpoon I found. It even shoots when pressing a button. I know she will only have one witch hand then, but Bill said we can use the attributes very loosely anyway. The harpoon was just too perfect for a deep diver. We are finally done with the builds and can enter the painting stage. I will prime them with this cheap spray primer that works surprisingly well, but first I need to mask off their little windows. I last minute also put a little rivet on the top of her helmet. For the parts that are directly attached to the body, I used a primer that I could brush on. In the midst of doing that, I also decided to hide the seams on the thighs with those round rivets. Those little changes that come to your mind when you know you soon won't be able to go back. And here are the other pieces primed. It's so satisfying the first time seeing everything come together as one piece. I pulled the liquid mask off, but will reapply it again for the rest of the painting. This way I wanted to avoid too much buildup of the paint that will be visible once you pull it off. Now one last essential that a girl needs as a diver is oxygen bottles. I had these tubes lying around that will be my base shape. I just needed to shorten them a bit. I cut them with a heated up box cutter. The rounded tips I formed with epoxy. These random little plastic rings from my garbage will be the base for the valves, and this thing from a jelly package will be their connecting piece. Of course we cannot forget our flat wire. It will be the metal belt that holds the two bottles together. Since it won't stick to the plastic, I needed to put another strip of craft foam underneath. This other piece from my garbage will be the part that faces her back. The foam underneath again is to make that other piece stick better. The flat wire will also function as her shoulder straps. I want them to be crossed over the front of her body. I got these tiny buckles that fully work like real buckles, and it might be my favorite detail on the whole doll. I just love them. I glued the straps on normally first, and then I measured the perfect length. I then cut them apart where the buckles are supposed to be, keeping the length of the buckles themselves in mind. To make sure they won't come off, I decided sewing them on would be the safest solution, and then I also put a bit of glue on the sewn parts. The result is so cool, I love this way too much. If you look closely, you can see that one of the buckles is the wrong way around, although I swear I triple checked. Oh well, it is barely visible, and undoing the threads would leave the wire too destroyed to reattach it, so I can't do anything about it anyway. The bottom gets filled up with air dry clay again. These two junkbot pieces connect everything perfectly to form the valve part. I also added this piece just because I thought it looked cool. I attached the air hose permanently to the bottles with the help of more foam. The last part of the valves were these actual valves that I found in the junkbot box. And I also found this little pressure gauge. I spray primed this too, and now we're really at the painting stage, I swear. This process is pretty much the same as it was with the jaw, lots of brown and orange acrylics and lots of crushed up pastels. By the way, I also found a little compass in the junkbot box, you can see it on her arm. The little piece of epoxy on her arm also needed to be color matched. Her shoes are supposed to have the look of linen, so I gave them a beigey off-white color. For the laces I chose black, same as the buckles. All her gear should look like it belonged together, so I wanted each to have parts painted in the same color, for which I chose this petrol blue. Since it's been lying there for a long time, it is supposed to look worn out, and especially the corners and edges wouldn't have any paint on them left. This technique is used by a lot of crafting YouTubers, where I paint everything normally but leave the edges out in a realistic, worn out way. I like this technique because the paint layer would be like this in reality too. I wanted to use the beige color throughout the design as well, for example on the shoulder part of her helmet and her oxygen bottle straps. I felt like the rust was a bit too monotone, so I added a bronzy color to some parts to make it look like a different material. The inside of her helmet had to go black so that no light color would stand out when looking through the windows. With the wash, I gave the light part some definition and a more worn out look. The harpoon also needed a bit of a nicer metal paint, and I used a mossy green to make it look like it had grown algae. Algae? I didn't want too much paint on it though, because I was afraid it would rub off when using the little shooting mechanism. I also made sure to spread a bit of green on the other parts. I haven't put in the front window yet, so I cut another piece of clear plastic packaging and glued it on from the inside. As I mentioned before, I wanted one part of the helmet to look like little lamps, as well as some other parts too. I prepared them by painting them white first. The lower lamp on the helmet is going to be red and is supposed to look like it's turned off. The rest I paint in this really pretty translucent green. Then I covered all those pots with UV resin to make it look like they have a glass cover. To make the glass on the helmet look more realistic as well, I mixed a tiny bit of translucent greenish blue alcohol ink into my UV resin and gave the windows a few coats. And this is finally the last step. Here she is, a Bangarang in the Gutterlands junk cyborg. Honestly, this project required so much brainpower and just searching through garbage and trying out so many shapes. At times I just sat there looking at random pieces of junk, not knowing how I was going to make this look like a leg or an oxygen bottle. I really wanted to be back within a month or so, but no chance with this kind of an assignment. Nonetheless, I enjoyed this so much and I love the result. Build's junkbot generator is so versatile, I could fill the whole channel up with only making builds with it and the possibilities would still be endless. Even with the same attributes, the doll could still look totally different. So I'm sure this won't be my last Gutterlands doll, so please tell me if you would enjoy more of these two. For now though, I definitely need a comfy project that goes easy on my mind. I have a few ideas. If you want to know what it is, I'll be happy to see you in the next video. Bye!